April 7, 1945. The Philippine Sea, 200 miles southwest of Kyushu. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steel deck of the battleship Yamato as Admiral Seiichi Ito stood in the bridge, watching the horizon through salt-stained glass. The air carried the metallic taste of ocean spray mixed with diesel fumes from the ship's massive engines. In his hand, he clutched a simple tin can, a captured American K-ration, discovered among the belongings of a downed B-29 crew months earlier. The label read, "Beef and pork, chopped," such abundance in a single meal that it fed 3 Japanese sailors. He had kept it as a curious trophy, never imagining it would become a harbinger of his nation's doom. The Yamato's 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship, gleamed in the dawn light. Each shell weighed as much as a small automobile. The ship itself displaced 72,800 tons when fully loaded, a floating fortress that embodied the very essence of Japanese naval supremacy. Yet, something had changed in the war's calculus, something the High Command was only beginning to comprehend. The captured ration tin seemed to mock him now, its cheerful American typography a testament to an industrial capacity that Japan had fatally underestimated. Historical context: the fatal miscalculation when Admiral Yamamoto had warned his superiors in 1941 that Japan could run wild for 6 months to a year before America's true strength awakened. Few in Tokyo truly grasped what he meant. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been tactically brilliant, but strategically catastrophic, not because it failed to achieve its immediate objectives, but because it aroused a sleeping giant whose productive power defied comprehension. The numbers told a story that Japanese planners had refused to believe. In 1940, American steel production reached 60.8 million tons annually, compared to Japan's 6.8 million. American automobile factories produced 4.4 million vehicles that year, more than the rest of the world combined. When these same factories converted to military production, they didn't merely supplement Japan's war effort, they utterly dwarfed it. By 1943, American shipyards were launching a Liberty ship every 24 hours. The Kaiser Richmond shipyard had reduced construction time from 355 days to an astonishing 27 days for a single vessel. Meanwhile, Japan's shipbuilding industry, crippled by resource shortages and bombing raids, struggled to replace losses at a fraction of that rate. The symbolic K-ration that Admiral Ito held represented more than food. It embodied a logistical network that could feed, clothe, and arm millions of soldiers across multiple continents simultaneously. German intelligence had made similar miscalculations. In Berlin, military planners had dismissed American industrial reports as propaganda. How could a nation of jazz music and Hollywood films transition to total war production? The answer lay in America's fundamental economic structure, an economy built on mass production, standardization, and innovation that could be rapidly converted from civilian to military purposes. The European Theater. Fortress Europa's Crumbling Foundations. June 5, 1944, the English Channel, off the coast of Normandy. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood on the concrete ramparts of the Atlantic Wall, watching the gray waters of the Channel through his binoculars. The wind carried the salt tang of seaweed and the distant rumble of aircraft engines. In his pocket, he carried a tin of American Spam, captured from a commando raid months earlier. The processed meat had amazed German nutritionists, not for its taste, but for its shelf life and nutritional density. How could the Americans mass-produce food that remained edible for years without refrigeration? The Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, a testament to German engineering prowess. Concrete bunkers housed 88mm guns that could penetrate any Allied tank. Dragon's teeth tank traps lined the beaches. millions of mines turned the coastline into a death trap. Yet Rommel harbored growing doubts about the wall's effectiveness. The Allies would need ports to sustain an invasion, and every major port from Cherbourg to Le Havre bristled with German defenses. Surely, no army could be supplied across open beaches for more than a few days. This assumption would prove to be Germany's fatal error. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in human history commenced. Operation Overlord involved 156,000 Allied troops, supported by 5,000 ships and 13,000 aircraft. But the true shock for German defenders came not from the scale of the initial assault, but from what followed. The Mulberry Harbor Miracle. Within 48 hours of the landings, something unprecedented began taking shape off the Norman coast. American and British engineers were constructing artificial harbors, complete ports fabricated in Britain and towed across the Channel. The Mulberry Harbors, as they were code-named, could accommodate vessels displacing up to 10,000 tons. Each harbor required 146 massive concrete caissons, each weighing 6,000 tons, along with floating piers, breakwaters, and roadways. German reconnaissance pilots returning from missions over the beachhead filed reports that their superiors initially dismissed as hallucinations or enemy propaganda. Entire harbors were materializing from nothing. By June 12th, just 6 days after the initial landings, the Mulberry Harbors were operational. Supply ships discharged cargo directly onto French soil at a rate of 7,000 tons per day, more than the port of Dover typically handled in peacetime. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, Hitler's chief of operations, studied the intelligence reports with growing disbelief. In his diary, he wrote, "The enemy has accomplished what we deemed impossible: the construction of major port facilities in a matter of days. Our entire defensive strategy was predicated on controlling the existing harbors. We failed to account for their ability to create new ones from thin air." The psychological impact on German forces proved as devastating as the logistical implications. Wehrmacht soldiers, accustomed to fighting with limited supplies and irregular food deliveries, watched in amazement as American GIs consumed hot meals from tin cans, discarding half-eaten K-rations that contained more protein than a German soldier received in 3 days. The abundance was incomprehensible to troops who had been on reduced rations since 1942. The collapse of German morale, April 15, 1945. The Ruhr Pocket, Western Germany. Oberst Heinrich Steinberg crouched in a shell crater, clutching an empty American ration tin he had found among the debris. His uniform hung loose on his emaciated frame, testament to months of inadequate supplies. Around him, the remnants of Army Group B prepared for what many knew would be their final battle. The Ruhr Pocket represented Germany's last major concentration of industrial power and military strength west of Berlin. Field Marshal Walter Model had assembled 325,000 troops, including some of Germany's most experienced divisions. Yet as American forces tightened their grip around the pocket, something unprecedented occurred in Wehrmacht history. Mass surrender on a scale never before witnessed. The transformation began not with military defeat, but with the realization of American abundance. As German positions were overrun, Wehrmacht soldiers discovered American supply depots containing more food, ammunition, and equipment than entire German divisions had seen in months. American field kitchens served hot meals to frontline troops, a luxury German forces had not experienced. Since the early days of the war, Captain Robert Murphy of the 3rd Armored Division recorded in his journal, "We found German officers weeping as they examined our supply dumps. One colonel told me through an interpreter that he had ordered his men to fight to the last bullet, but they had been fighting with no bullets for days, while we seemed to have infinite ammunition. He said it was not cowardice that broke their will, but the mathematical impossibility of victory against such overwhelming material superiority." The numbers supported this assessment. By April 1945, American forces in Europe were consuming 66,000 tons of supplies daily, more than the entire Wehrmacht received in a week. Each American division was supported by a logistics network that included 240 trucks, compared to German divisions that often relied on horse-drawn transport due to fuel shortages. The Great Surrender between April 15 and April 21, 1945, exactly 325,000 German soldiers laid down their arms in the Ruhr pocket, the largest mass surrender in Wehrmacht history. But the psychological impact extended far beyond mere numbers. These were not demoralized conscripts or foreign volunteers, but veteran German troops who had fought from Normandy to the Rhine. Feldwebel Hans Kruger of the 116th Panzer Division later described his unit's surrender. "We had prepared for a heroic last stand, as German soldiers had done throughout the war. But when the Americans overran our positions, they offered us hot coffee and chocolate bars from their rations. Our company had not seen chocolate in 2 years. The realization struck us that we were not fighting soldiers. We were fighting an industrial civilization that could afford to give candy to its warriors while our fatherland could barely feed its children." The key, captured ration tins, became powerful symbols among German prisoners. Wehrmacht veterans who had stormed across Europe with seemingly unstoppable power now held American food containers and marveled at the production codes, expiration dates, and nutritional information printed in multiple languages. Each tin represented a supply chain that spanned continents, an industrial base that could simultaneously feed armies, build ships, manufacture aircraft, and develop new weapons technologies. The Pacific Revelation, April 7, 1945. Bridge of the battleship Yamato, Philippine Sea. Admiral Ito's contemplation of the American ration tin was interrupted by the air raid sirens. His lookouts had spotted aircraft on the horizon. Not a few reconnaissance planes, but a vast armada that darkened the morning sky. Task Force 58 had launched 386 aircraft from 11 aircraft carriers. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters converging on Operation Tengo, Japan's last desperate gambit to halt the American advance toward the home islands. The Yamato and her escorts were steaming toward Okinawa on a suicide mission, carrying only enough fuel for a one-way voyage. The plan was brutally simple. Beach the great battleship and use her massive guns as coastal artillery until ammunition was exhausted, then fight to the death. It was a strategy born of desperation, not tactical wisdom. Japanese naval doctrine had emphasized the decisive battle, one climactic encounter between enemy fleets that would determine naval supremacy. The Yamato represented the pinnacle of this philosophy, armed with the most powerful guns ever mounted on a warship and protected by armor up to 26 inches thick. Japanese admirals had boasted that no existing weapon could penetrate the Yamato's vital areas. This confidence proved tragically misplaced. The Yamato's final hour, the Abihi, first wave of American aircraft arrived at 12:32 p.m. Grumman Avengers launched torpedoes while Curtiss Helldivers screamed down in near-vertical dives, their 1,000-pound bombs aimed at the battleship's superstructure. The Yamato's massive anti-aircraft battery responded with desperate fury, filling the sky with bursting shells and tracer fire. But the American attack was unlike anything the Japanese Navy had previously encountered. Instead of the small, coordinated strikes typical of earlier naval battles, this was an overwhelming assault by industrial warfare. Wave after wave of aircraft attacked from multiple directions, saturating the Yamato's defenses through sheer numbers. Admiral Ito watched from the bridge as his mighty ship absorbed hit after hit. The Yamato's armor held initially, but the cumulative damage began telling. Torpedo hits below the waterline flooded compartments faster than damage control parties could respond. Bomb hits destroyed gun turrets and started fires that spread through the superstructure. At 2:05 p.m., a massive explosion rocked the ship as the forward magazine detonated. The blast was visible from 100 miles away and registered on seismographs in Japan. The Yamato, pride of the Imperial Navy and symbol of Japanese naval supremacy, broke apart and sank in less than 2 hours. Of her crew of 2,778 men, only 276 survived. Industrial warfare triumphant. The sinking of the Yamato represented more than the destruction of a single warship. It marked the end of an era in naval warfare. The battleship, once the ultimate expression of national power, had been rendered obsolete by carrier-based aviation and industrial production capacity. The American task force that destroyed the Yamato consisted of 11 aircraft carriers, each a floating airbase capable of projecting power across hundreds of miles. These carriers had been built in American shipyards at a rate that Japanese planners deemed impossible. The Essex-class carriers alone numbered 24 ships by war's end, each displacing more than most entire navies. Captain Mitsuru Yoshida, one of the Yamato's few survivors, later reflected on the battle's significance. "We had built the ultimate battleship, believing that superior firepower and armor would prevail. But the Americans had built something far more powerful. An industrial system that could produce hundreds of aircraft, train thousands of pilots, and coordinate attacks of unprecedented complexity. We brought the finest sword to a battle fought with machines." The symbolic power of the American ration tin, which Admiral Ito had carried to his death, embodied this industrial supremacy. While Japanese sailors received reduced rations of rice and dried fish, American pilots consumed beef stew, chocolate bars, and canned fruit before missions. The differential in nutrition reflected a broader gap in industrial capacity that no amount of courage or tactical skill could overcome. The Intelligence Awakening Tokyo, Imperial Navy Headquarters, April 8, 1945. The news of the Yamato's destruction reached Tokyo at dawn, carried by one of the few surviving escort destroyers. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, sat in his austere office, studying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture of Japan's strategic position. The reports detailed American production figures that defied belief. In 1944 alone, American shipyards had launched 2,247 vessels, including 151 aircraft carriers of various classes. American aircraft factories produced 96,318 military aircraft that year, more than Japan had manufactured during the entire war. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant alone built 8,685 B-24 Liberator bombers, rolling one completed aircraft off the assembly line every 63 minutes. These numbers represented more than industrial capacity. They demonstrated a fundamental difference in societal organization. American war production had achieved levels that seemed to violate economic laws, yet they were sustained year after year without apparent strain on the civilian economy. American workers enjoyed higher wages during wartime than Japanese civilians had ever known in peacetime. Admiral Toyoda examined captured American equipment with growing unease. A simple field radio carried markings indicating manufacture in Ohio, assembly in California, and final inspection in New York, a supply chain spanning a continent. Japanese industry, concentrated in vulnerable coastal cities and dependent on imported raw materials, could not match such distributed production. The transformation of military thinking. The revelation of American industrial might force a fundamental reassessment of military doctrine among surviving Axis commanders. Traditional military thinking emphasized training, tactics, and courage as decisive factors in warfare. The German Wehrmacht had demonstrated that superior training and aggressive tactics could overcome numerical disadvantages, at least initially. But American industrial warfare represented a new paradigm. Quantity had achieved a quality of its own, American forces might not match German tactical proficiency or Japanese spiritual dedication, but they possessed something far more powerful: the ability to replace losses faster than they could be inflicted. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, captured after the Battle of the Bulge, provided a revealing assessment during interrogation. "We planned our offensive based on traditional military calculations: surprise, concentration of force, superior tactics. We achieved initial success because we were better soldiers. But within days, the Americans were replacing destroyed tanks faster than we could destroy them. They were flying more aircraft than we had ammunition to shoot down. This was not warfare as we understood it. This was industrial production applied to military ends. The K-ration philosophy. The humble K-ration, introduced by the U.S. Army in 1942, embodied America's approach to warfare. Each ration contained 3,000 calories spread across 3 meals: breakfast, dinner, and supper. The contents varied but typically included canned meat, crackers, candy, chewing gum, and cigarettes. More importantly, each ration carried a production code indicating its origin, a traceable link to specific factories, quality control standards, and distribution networks. German and Japanese soldiers who captured these rations marveled at their standardization and abundance. The chewing gum alone represented a luxury that most Axis troops had not experienced since peacetime. American soldiers discarded half-eaten rations that contained more protein and calories than enemy soldiers received in their complete daily allowance. This abundance was not accidental, but philosophical. American military doctrine emphasized maintaining soldier morale and fighting effectiveness through superior logistics. Well-fed troops fought better, suffered fewer diseases, and maintained higher morale under adverse conditions. The K-ration represented a military investment that paid dividends in combat effectiveness. The final realizations, May 8, 1945, Flensburg, northern Germany. Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's designated successor, signed Germany's unconditional surrender in the early morning hours. In his final radio address to the German people, he spoke of overwhelming enemy superiority, but could not fully articulate what German military leaders had discovered too late. The defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan resulted not from superior Allied courage or tactics, but from a fundamental miscalculation about American industrial capacity. Both Axis powers had viewed America as a culturally decadent democracy incapable of sustained military effort. They had confused political flexibility with military weakness, consumer prosperity with industrial inefficiency. The truth proved far different. American democracy had unleashed productive forces that totalitarian regimes could not match. While Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan devoted enormous resources to political control and ideological indoctrination, American society channeled its energies into practical problem-solving and industrial innovation. The symbolic legacy in the aftermath of victory. American forces distributed millions of K-rations to displaced persons across Europe and Asia. Former enemies who had been taught to view Americans as weak and materialistic discovered that American abundance extended beyond military necessity to humanitarian relief. The same industrial system that had produced weapons in unprecedented quantities could provide food, medicine, and shelter to war-torn populations. The psychological impact of this abundance proved as important as its material effects. European and Asian observers witnessed a society that could wage total war while maintaining civilian prosperity, that could feed its enemies better than those enemies had fed themselves. The K-ration became a symbol not just of American industrial might, but of a different social organization, one that prioritized individual welfare as the foundation of collective strength. Epilogue. The democracy of abundance. The Axis powers' fatal miscalculation revealed a fundamental truth about democratic societies and industrial warfare. They had assumed that political freedom weakened military effectiveness. that consumer prosperity indicated national decadence. Instead, they discovered that free societies possessed hidden reserves of strength unavailable to totalitarian regimes. American abundance was not accidental, but systemic. A society that educated its citizens, rewarded innovation, and respected individual initiative naturally developed the productive capacity to sustain global warfare. The same factories that manufactured automobiles could build tanks. The same workers who created consumer goods could produce military equipment. The same management systems that served civilian markets could coordinate military logistics. The simple K-ration, carried in the pockets of American soldiers across 4 continents, embodied this democratic advantage. It represented an economic system that could simultaneously feed armies, supply allies, and maintain civilian prosperity. More profoundly, it symbolized a society confident enough in its abundance to share food with enemies, secure enough in its strength to show mercy to the defeated. When Admiral Ito went down with the Yamato, clutching that captured American ration tin, he carried with him the recognition of Japan's fundamental error. When German soldiers surrendered en masse rather than face American forces, they acknowledged not just military defeat, but the impossibility of victory against such overwhelming material superiority. When the Atlantic Wall crumbled before artificial harbors built overnight, Nazi Germany confronted the reality that American ingenuity could overcome any static defense. The victory belonged not to American soldiers alone, but to American society, to the workers who built ships faster than enemies could sink them, to the farmers who fed armies across oceans, to the engineers who solved unprecedented logistical challenges, to the civilians who supported total war without sacrificing democratic values. The K-ration was their signature, a simple tin can that announced to the world, "This is what free people can accomplish when their liberty is threatened." In the end, the Axis powers discovered too late that they had not awakened a sleeping giant. They had aroused a democratic civilization whose strength lay not in military tradition or racial superiority, but in the productive power of free people working toward common purpose. The abundance that seemed like weakness proved to be the foundation of invincible strength, and the democracy they despised became the forge of their defeat. The war's outcome was decided not on battlefields alone, but in factories, shipyards, and farms where American abundance transformed industrial capacity into military victory. Every K-ration carried across the world proclaimed this truth: freedom feeds itself, arms itself, and ultimately liberates itself through the simple but revolutionary principle that prosperity shared is strength multiplied. The tin cans that nourished American soldiers became the messengers of democracy's triumph, small symbols of a great truth that totalitarian regimes learned too late to comprehend.